Universities brought this encampment drama upon themselves because they do not understand the difference between free speech and expression and illegal behavior, and they have not taught their student body the difference between these things. My take on this is that, yes, it's definitely about Israel and Palestine. And yes, there are saboteurs working inside of these protest movements in order to push their own agenda. But what I really want to focus on here is this liberal problem that liberal universities have created for themselves. The encampment drama that started at Columbia and spread across the country is in crisis of the school's own making because they don't have clear guidelines and they do not support free speech, only sometimes when the ideology is not uncomfortable for them. That means we, our generation, have failed to teach this next generation productive discourse. Now, this was pro-Palestine protesters this week seizing control of Hamilton Hall and barricading themselves inside, which Clayton just talked about in the previous segment. A lot of them were not students, but provocateurs. But let's watch what happened anyway. You get the idea of what happened there. Now, obviously, this has nothing to do with free speech. Occupying a campus building and blocking students from attending classes and vandalizing property is not a protected First Amendment right. It's illiberal and illegal, and it was, in fact, punished. Now students were arrested because of their occupation of this land. Now, you could tell in that video, even if some of them were not students, many of them were and were cheering on the occupation and destruction of this building. Now, how, though, are students supposed to know what they can get away with and what they can't when the universities have allowed students to scream and yell and have basically toddler fits about things they don't like, and they've gotten away with it for the last decade? Consider this scene from Stanford in March of 2023, when Stanford Law School invited Judge Kyle Duncan of the Fifth Circuit, he's a judge, to speak in a talk about COVID, guns, and Twitter. And watch how he is heckled. This is not even the worst of it, what happened to him in this speech, but let's watch anyway.
Yeah, and to this room, because you're asking into the room as well. Is that okay?
Associate Dean, what do you want to say? The room will talk to you. She doesn't need your permission.
Is that okay? Because you are also talking to the room.
You asked for an administrator. She is an administrator.
You just asked for an administrator in here.
Do you want to people chamber or do you want someone to hear you?
Okay. So what happens then is that woman who's an administrator, what happens later, her name is Dean Steinbach, he asked for her help and she proceeded to speak for 7 minutes and take up his time. And she later questioned whether or not his controversial topics was worth it because it was upsetting the students. Now, he knew that he was a controversial figure. So when he was invited to speak, he spoke on condition. He asked the university that if students disrupted the event, they would be given a warning and then removed. Stanford agreed to that, but that did not happen. Not only did they show up and disrupt just setting the room up, they peppered the room with flyers and they yelled at him that they hoped that his daughters got raped. That's what they literally yelled during the speech. So it wasn't just heckling, it was disrupting the learning environment, occupying a building, and then threatening him, saying these threatening things. Now, he did get an apology from Stanford Law School Dean Jenny Martinez, and Dean Steinbach, this woman who we just showed you, she resigned because of this, because there were calls for her resignation because she was so disrespectful to him. But none of the protesters were punished because they were told that their feelings about the rulings that this judge had handed down from the bench were so important that they could disrupt the learning environment. So they were not taught any kind of productive discourse. Again, consider when gender critical academic Kathleen Stock was invited to speak at the Oxford Union later. She had so many threats, so many students threatened to come, and they had bomb threats. They had all kinds of basically whiny baby students saying, we cannot even platform her. We cannot let her speak at all because she is a lesbian who contends that biological sex is real and very important, especially to lesbians, and they could not hear that. She was shouted down and threatened. The university was surrounded, so much so that she had to have bodyguards leading up to this talk, and before and after. In fact, trans person Riz Posnet glued herself to the floor in advance of this speech. I mean, if you ever want to see what a whiny baby looks like that's what a toddler does. That's not what a productive discourse looks like. But she was not punished. She was applauded when she was removed from the room. All this to say, why wouldn't these pro-Palestine protesters think that they could do this? Black Lives Matter protesters did this. Me Too protesters did this. Universities have allowed protests that they think are ideologically popular and then went and shut down speech that's not. So those who are in the popular camp often go to extremes, and they're allowed it. And so this isn't about Palestinians or Jews. It's about how our society has lost productive discourse. And the prisoners are in charge, as the saying goes. Is that the saying?
The inmates are in charge of the asylum, right?
That's exactly what it is. The adults are not in charge, and they haven't been for over a decade. But I want to give you two examples of universities leading in a productive way, in my opinion. One is the University of Chicago. They published this letter saying, this is what we do about campus protests, that free expression is the core animating value of the University of Chicago. So it's critical that we be clear about how we think about encampments and how the actions we take in response will follow directly from our principles. They say that their general principle is to provide the greatest leeway possible for free expression, even expression of viewpoints that some find deeply offensive. And they are committed to it. They said, as an example, earlier in the year, some protesters got permission to put a Palestinian flag made by tiny flags with a sign that said, "Honor the martyrs." Take a look at this sign. Now, they allowed it even though they realized that some might find this offensive, specifically people who may be Jewish or pro-Israeli. But they said, this is our values and we have to allow it. And they asked permission, and this is within the purview of free speech. And in contrast to this, last November, students protested the war, and some attempted to occupy what they call Rosenwald Hall. And they were removed after repeated warnings because disrupting the learning environment is not a part of free speech. Watch.
Justice is our demand.
The wars continue on college campuses, advocating for peace in the Middle East. Students coming together at the University of Chicago today for another rally, demanding a public meeting with the school president.
So when they broke into that building, that's when it stopped. But up until that point, it's allowed. And that is how you create productive discourse. Now, the reason the University of Chicago does this so well is because they have a mission statement that's over 40 years old. And for this very reason, this here is Harry Calvin from the University of Chicago Law School. In February of 1967, he was asked by the university president to prepare a statement on the university's role in political and social action. And the report that he prepared is about 3 pages. I linked to it in the newsletter this morning, and I think it's actually a beautiful piece of academic work because it has a full stop commitment to free speech and free thought, but it gives the university the right to intervene if the learning environment is being disruptive. And he honors the fact that the university is an important place to discuss discomfortable subjects. Take a look at this. I wanted to just read this together, if you don't mind. This is what he said. A university has a great and unique role to play in fostering the development of social and political values in a society. or at least it did in the 60s. The role is defined by the distinctive mission of the university, and it defined too by the distinctive characteristics of the university as a community. It is a role for the long term. The mission of the university is the discovery, improvement, and dissemination of knowledge. Its domain of inquiry and scrutiny includes all aspects and all values of society. A university faithful to its mission will provide enduring challenges to social values, policies, practices, and institutions. By design and by effect, it is the institution which creates discontent with the existing social arrangements and proposes new ones. In belief, a good university like Socrates will be upsetting. How many universities allow for this right now? How many institutions in the West allow for the fact that in order to have social progress, we must be offended and upset by certain things in order to be able to see them from all ways? I think that this is a beautiful guiding document, but he does say this about the university's neutrality, that it's not indifference. He says the neutrality of the university as an institution arises not from a lack of courage nor out of indifference and insensitivity. It arises out of respect for free inquiry and the obligation to cherish a diversity of viewpoints. I just wished we could have a renaissance to this commitment, to this document. But he does say, if there is disruption of the university's mission, which is to teach, then the university should get involved. So again, this is a crisis about a productive and uncomfortable dialogue and our inability to have one. But here are some silver linings. There is hope. The state of Kansas passed House Bill 2105, which will become law this summer. What this law means is that public colleges cannot require DEI statements or any kind of political litmus tests in their hiring practices. Did you know that universities do this in increasing numbers in the last decade? What it is, like, take a look at this one. This is from, where is it? Vassar College. They say that each program hiring for tenure track and multi-year faculty positions requests that all candidates submit a diversity statement. Now think about this. You're a math teacher, and maybe a damn good math teacher, but you're a white guy and you don't have a ton of thoughts on different types of diversity. You just want to do some math. Why do you have to submit to political litmus tests just to be a teacher? And what does that do? Well, what it does in the great book, The Canceling of the American Mind, is that it weeds out conservative professors. It creates universities that are a cesspool of uniminded people, and it's created the lack of diversity of opinion. And in fact, in tests, people who write their diversity statements about diversity of opinion don't get hired. But people who write an essay about, oh, I want to call on the Black students more, I want to give more help to the Native Americans, I want to promote LGBT issues, those are the people who get tenure track. And Kansas has now said that's not allowed. So these two are places that I think, or these places, Kansas and the University of Chicago, are places where there are silver linings that people are saying, no, these are our values. They're hard and we're going to do it. But we look to these liberal universities and we see them failing to do it. And then they're so surprised that they have not protected free speech and academic diversity. So let me know what you think of this. Is this, again, a silver lining? Is this something we will learn from collectively in universities? For me, as I'm going to have a freshman in high school next year, I would never choose these universities for him to apply to, these liberal universities that have no commitment to free speech. But let me know what you think.
I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. You know, YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it. And we will see you next time, everyone.